It's my honor to introduce Pamela Chappell. She's a singer, songwriter, spiritual teacher, and an amateur genealogist. She's ordained with the International Metaphysical Ministry, and after serving as an educator for over 35 years, she has earned her doctorate from the University of Sedona. Pam resides in South Haven with her husband, Pete Wheely. There they are. Thank you.
Good evening. I'm so happy you're here with us tonight. And I'd like to share with you some stories about women who have contributed to a better world. You may have heard the quotation, well-behaved women seldom make history. And you'll find that some of the women we're going to be talking about spoke out against the powers that be, would not have been considered well-behaved, but they did make history. I'd like to begin by reading to you a piece by Chloe Angel, which is called Men Write History, but Women Live It. History, as we know, is still a story that's largely told by men. An analysis of America's most popular recent history books found that the vast majority, 75.8%, were written by men. And most of those men wrote about other men. 71.7% of the biographies were about male subjects. Now, many women who wrote biographies, 31%, wrote about men too, while only 6% of male biographers chose to document a woman's life. It's mostly men who write history, and mostly men who, according to those history books, make history. But it's women who live through most of it. And in daily life, it's women who do the work of remembering important names and dates and events. It's women who write the shopping lists and birthday cards and absence notes, documents that rarely make it into history books, while men are busy writing magazine articles and legislation, and the history books themselves. The names and dates are the easy stuff. It's the intimate, unwritten histories, women's histories, that die when we do. Okay, now I want you to know from the offset that although I am a feminist, I do love men. Some of my best friends are men. My husband is a man, so I'm not a man hater at all, but I am one who aspires to create balance. And I think we need more balance in this world. So when I talk to you about some of the contributions of women, I want you to think about two things. I want you to think about adjectives that describe these women. What adjectives would you use? And the other thing I'd like you to do is ask yourself, what can we learn from these women? Now, of course, there are some women who have made history, whose names have become household names and so forth. And we'll start by reviewing a handful of those. Obviously, there are so many, we couldn't do it in the time we have. But then I want to turn our attention to some women who are not as well known, but who have made significant contributions. So among the women who are quite well known are Rosa Parks, Susan B. Anthony, Anne Frank, Joan of Arc, Florence Nightingale, Princess Diana, Mother Teresa, Sacagawea, Clara Barton, in case you don't know, the founder of the American Red Cross, RBG, Ruth Bader Ginsburg. Hang in there, honey. And I hope you have heard of Peace Pilgrim, who walked more than 25,000 miles on a personal pilgrimage for peace. Sojourner Truth, who was an abolitionist and women's rights activist. She actually lived in Battle Creek for 27 years and was named by the Smithsonian as one of the most important, significant Americans of all times. Harriet Tubman, and Maya Angelou, some truly wonderful women. And if we had time, we'd talk more about their accomplishments, their stories. But right now, what I'd like to do is talk with you about some women whose names are not as well known. And one is this woman, Malala Yousafzai. I have trouble with her name. Yousafzai. She's from Pakistan, and she's an advocate for education for girls. When she was 11 years old, she started writing a blog about life under the Taliban and the threat to schools for girls. And about a year later, a gunman shot her and two other girls as they were coming home from school. She survived this, although she lost an ear. And she went on to found the Malala Foundation to champion girls' rights and girls' rights to education. In 2014, she received the Nobel Peace Prize. Here's a quote from Malala. "We human beings don't realize how great God is. He has given us an extraordinary brain and a sensitive, loving heart. He has blessed us with 2 lips to talk and express our feelings, 2 eyes with which to see a world of colors and beauty, 2 feet which walk on the road of life, 2 hands to work for us, and 2 ears to hear the words of love. As I found with my ear, no one knows how much power they have in their each and every organ until they lose one." Malala Yousafzai. This woman is Nadia Murad. She is a prominent voice in the fight to help women and children affected by war. Back about 6 years ago, she was kidnapped by the Islamic State and held captive for 3 months, where she was held as a slave and experienced sexual and physical violence. After her escape, she became the first person to speak on human trafficking in the United Nations. And in 2018, she was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize for her work. She did say something as she recalled her experience when she was being held captive. She said, "You don't know who will open the door next to attack you, just that it will happen, and that tomorrow might be worse. I want to be the last girl in the world with a story like mine." This woman is Benazar Bhutto, born in Pakistan. She was a political activist from the time she was a young age. She founded an underground organization to resist the country's military dictatorship. And then 4 years later, she became prime minister when she was only 35 years old. Bhutto electrified the countryside, built schools all over the country, made hunger, housing, and health care her top priorities. Unfortunately, she was assassinated in 2007 while leaving a campaign rally. This woman is Rigoberta Menchú. She's an indigenous Guatemalan woman of the Quiché branch of the Mayan culture, and she spent her life promoting the rights of indigenous people, women's rights, workers' rights. And in 1981, after most of her family had been killed and her own life was in danger, she fled to Mexico and continued her resistance work against oppression in Guatemala. In 1992, she became the first indigenous person to receive a Nobel Peace Prize. And here's a quote from Rigoberta. "Let there be freedom for the Indians, wherever they may be in the American continent or elsewhere in the world. Because while they are alive, a glow of hope will be alive, as well as the true concept of life." That's Rigoberta. And this is a woman I didn't know about until recently. Her name is Nellie Bly, and she was a pioneering journalist. Now, back in her day, most women journalists wrote about gardening or fashion or cooking, but she wrote hard-hitting stories about the poor and oppressed. In 1886 and 87, she traveled in Mexico for several months and reported on official corruption there and also on the condition of the poor. Another investigation saw her pretending to be mentally ill in order to expose conditions inside asylums. She said, "I said I believed I could. I had some faith in my own ability as an actress, and I thought I could assume insanity long enough to accomplish any mission entrusted in me. Could I pass a week in the insane ward at Blackwell's Island? I said I could, and I would, and I did. Nellie Bly. This is Wangari Maathai. She was a Kenyan environmental activist, and she founded the Green Belt movement. She campaigned for planting trees, environmental conservation, and women's rights. She was elected to Parliament in Kenya and appointed the Assistant Minister for Environment and Natural Resources. In 2004, she became the first African woman to receive the Nobel Peace Prize for her contribution to sustainable development, peace, and democracy. I have a quote from Wangari that I believe is very appropriate for our world today, especially in our country. In the course of history, there comes a time when humanity is called to shift to a new level of consciousness, to reach a higher moral ground, a time when we have to shed our fear and give hope to each other. That time is now. And talk about spunk. I'd like you to see a drawing of Sybil Ludington. She was 16 years old during the Revolutionary War, and in 1777, she made an all-night horseback ride, kind of Paul Revere style, to alert militia forces in New York and Connecticut that the British were coming. And I have one quote from Sybil Ludington. She said, "Let me. I can ride as well as any man." She was something else. And here's another young woman who's made a great impact already in her short time. Emma Gonzalez is an American activist and advocate for gun control. She was a senior in high school when the Stoneman Douglas High School survived the shooting in Parkland, Florida. She survived, and in response, she co-funded the gun control advocacy group called Never Again. A quote from Emma is this: "In Florida, to buy a gun, you do not need a permit. You do not need a gun license. And once you buy it, you do not need to register it. You do not need a permit to carry a concealed rifle or shotgun. You can buy as many guns as you want at one time. To every politician who is taking donations from the NRA, shame on you." That's Emma. Some of you will recognize this woman, Hatshepsut. Hatshepsut was a female pharaoh of Egypt back when there were very, very few female pharaohs. Her rule was relatively peaceful, and she was able to launch a building program all across Egypt. Egyptologists think of her as one of the most successful pharaohs in all times. A quote from Hatshepsut: "I have done things according to the design of my heart. I have restored that which was in ruins. I have raised up that which was unfinished." And now we have Pema Chodron. Pema Chodron is an American Tibetan Buddhist. She's an ordained nun, and she's written several dozen books, including something I think would be useful to us right now, When Things Fall Apart, Heart Advice for Difficult Times. She's a great teacher, and I'd like to share a quotation from her. Again, I think this is very appropriate for us in this time in our country. "Things falling apart is a kind of testing and also a kind of healing. We think the problem is to pass the test or to overcome the problem. But the truth is that things don't really get solved. They come together and they fall apart. Then they come together again and fall apart again. It's just like that. The healing comes from letting there be room for all of this to happen. Room for grief, for relief, for misery, for joy." Pema Chodron. This remarkable woman is Irina Sendler. This shows her as a young woman and as a mature woman. She was a Polish Catholic social worker during World War II, and she helped smuggle Jewish children out of the Warsaw Ghetto. She provided the children with false identity documents and shelter, and with willing Polish families and in orphanages, saving them from the Holocaust. She was nominated for a Nobel Peace Prize in 2007. Now, during the war, she began to work as a nurse, and she smuggled Jewish infants in and out of the ghetto in her toolbox, which had a false bottom. She also hid larger kids in burlap sack in the back of her truck. Irina had a dog that she had trained to bark when the Nazis let her in and out of the ghetto. Her dog's barks covered up the noise that the kids made. She managed to smuggle out and rescue 2,500 kids. She kept their names in a jar that she buried in her backyard along with their parents' names in hopes that after the war she would be able to help them find each other, which she did in a large number of cases. I'd like to share with you one more contemporary person who is well known by some, and she's one of my favorite authors. This is Anne Lamott, American novelist and nonfiction writer, progressive political activist, public speaker, and writing teacher. Now, when I looked for a quote from Anne Lamott, I wound up typing up 3 pages worth of quotes, and I won't save them all for you. I won't share them all with you, but I would like to share some of them because she's so good. At least she speaks to me. Here are quotes from Anne Lamott. Almost everything will work again if you unplug it for a few minutes, including you. Some people have a thick skin and you don't. Your heart is really open, and that is going to cause pain. But that is an appropriate response to this world. The cost is high, but the blessings of being compassionate is beyond your wildest dreams. She also was very modest and admitted her faults, right? She says, I thought such awful thoughts that I cannot even say them out loud because they would make Jesus want to drink gin straight out of the cat dish. And she also says that laughter is carbonated holiness. On families. Families, hard, no matter how cherished and astonishing they may be. At family gatherings where you suddenly feel homicidal or suicidal, remember that in half of all cases, it's a miracle that this annoying person ever lived. Earth is forgiveness school. You might as well start at the dinner table. That way you can do this in comfortable pants. On food, try to do a little better. On grace. I do not at all understand the mystery of grace, only that it meets us where we are, but does not leave us where it found us. It's funny, I always imagined when I was a kid that adults had some kind of inner toolbox full of shiny tools, the saw of discernment, the hammer of wisdom, the sandpaper of forgiveness. But then when I grew up, I found that life handed you these rusty, bent old tools, friendships, prayer, conscience, honesty, and said, do the best you can with these, they'll have to do. And mostly, against all odds, they do. On prayer. Help is a prayer that is always answered. It doesn't matter how you pray, with your head bowed in silence, or crying out in grief, or dancing. Churches are good for prayer, but so are garages and cars and mountains and showers and dance floors. Years ago, I wrote an essay that began, some people think that God is in the details, but I have come to believe that God is in the bathroom. And as it turns out, if one person is praying for you, buckle up. Things can happen. And finally, oh my God, what if you wake up someday and you're 65 or 75 or 85 and you never got your memoir or novel written, or you didn't go swimming in warm pools and oceans all those years because your thighs were jiggly and you had a nice, big, comfortable tummy? Or you were just so strung out on perfectionism and people-pleasing that you forgot to have a big, juicy, creative life of imagination and radical silliness and staring off into space like when you were a kid. It's going to break your heart. Don't let this happen. That's all Anne Lamott. I just love her. Well, you may think, okay, so we have all these wonderful women who've done amazing, fabulous things, but who am I? I mean, I don't have this wide circle of influence. I can't do that much. It just makes me feel inadequate. But I'm going to return now to Mother Teresa because she has a reply to that. She says, "We ourselves feel that what we are doing is just a drop in the ocean, but the ocean would be less because of that missing drop. Not all of us can do great things, but we can do small things with great love. What can you do to promote world peace? Go home and love your family. Never worry about numbers. Help one person at a time, and always start with the person nearest you. And finally, if we have no peace, it is because we have forgotten that we belong to each other." So I will say a prayer tonight for all these wonderful women that we've learned about, that I've learned about, the wonderful women in my life, and I will pray that I can become worthy of the name woman. And I share this with you with love and blessings. Namaste.
Thank you. Thank you, Pam. That was very inspiring. Very nice. Are there any questions or comments? Or Pam, did you want to have any closing comments? Or
Well, just that actually I did a workshop on women of faith about a year or two ago. And so I did a lot of research on about 60 different women. And it was hard to decide which ones to talk about, but because there are so many that are just really inspiring.
Great. Any questions or comments or thoughts from anyone?
Just that was wonderful. That was absolutely wonderful.
Thank you.
Very enlightening. Very enlightening. I like history.
I do too, Joan.
And very moving. It does make you look at your own situation and go, well, gee, my life isn't so bad. I mean, it really puts in perspective the courage and what these women did, what they went through. And I always wondered what it takes to have that much courage.
You know what, Linda, one of the things I think is that we do what we have to do when there's nothing else to do. Right. And when we're driven by our heart, by our commitment, by our love, by the responsibility we feel to other people.
Mm-hmm.
And I'd like to add that there are so many women that historically we've never heard of that were so full of courage. And I've got to say that my mother was one of them. She left her husband when I was about 6 years old. And she ended up kidnapping me, would have been called kidnapping today. I would say it was a rescue. And escaped from northern Michigan to Chicago with me. And because she wanted to have a job and make her own money, that was what the big argument was about between the two of them. And she was always, I always look back on her. This is the 1940s, and I was like, she was like really an early feminist before feminism was a thing. Because, and there are so many women like that don't have a name, but, you know, strong women and just absolutely not going to live by the norms of the day. And I thank God for my mother.
Yes.
Thank you.
That's really a good story, Lori.
Yes.
I would hope that we all have a strong woman in our family. If it wasn't our mother or it was our grandmother. And I'm sure, I know in my life I do. And so I hope we all have that honor and privilege to think about them for a minute.
I think with the number 2 symbolizing the woman's heart, and we're in 2000 for 1,000 years, I think the feminine energy is going to keep on growing and growing and growing because it just gets larger and larger and larger. But with that number in front of it, and here we have 2020, 2 is feminine, 10th power, 2 is feminine, 10th power this year. So the women that I have known have just been absolutely wonderful. Absolutely wonderful. And Pam, your talk tonight was absolutely magnificent. Thank you so very much. You were just were wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for the research that you did. Most of the first women that you named, I was completely aware of, but the last few that you did, I was not. And I really appreciate your sharing information about them. And I like the fact that you had the comic relief there in the statements at the end. Very profound, yet laughable.
We have to have a sense of humor, don't we?
Yes.
I saw a thing on, I don't know, it was maybe the Discovery Channel or the History Channel, and extended the story about Sydney Ludington, the young woman who, against her father's wishes, and she did it in the rain. I think, did you mention that?
I didn't mention that, but that's true. And she was only 16.
Yeah, and it was like she was the only one at the point who could collect all the militia.
Mm-hmm.
And her father didn't want her to, and I think she snuck out in spite of him and knew that she had to do this. It was a pretty amazing story.
Yeah. Yeah.
You're muted, Pam.
On and off and on and off. I'm just wondering if Ludington, Michigan was named for her.
Huh, really? Interesting thought. I don't
Good
know.
question.
Any other questions or comments?
Okay. All right. Very good. Well, thank you. Thank you, Pam. That was really, really great. Thank you. Okay, now, I wasn't sure. I heard that Pete was going to be doing something tonight.
That's it. The summer wind come blowing in from across the sea. It lingered there to touch your hair and walk with me. All summer long we sang a song, and then we strolled that golden sand. Two sweethearts and the summer wind, like painted kites, those days and nights, they went flying by. The world was new beneath the blue umbrella skies. Then softer than a piper man, one day it called to you. I lost you to the summer wind. The autumn winds and the winter winds, they have come and gone. Still those days, those lonely days, they go on and on. But guess who sighs his sweet lullabies through nights that never end. Ah, fickle friend, oh, that summer wind. Warm summer wind. Warm summer wind. Warm summer wind. The summer wind.
Very good. That's funny. I thought we were going to have singing, but I thought it was going to be from Pam.
Oh, wonderful, Frank. Fantastic.
Good job.
We love you.
Very good.
Encore. Encore. Yeah.
Yeah, where's my lighter, right?
I think he's still got it. He's still got it, you know.
Yeah.
Uh,
Of course, he hasn't had a haircut since January.
That goes with that like kind of musician, rock star kind of look, you know, so
Yeah.
it works good.
Back to the future. You know, back to the future.
yeah. Back to the
Christopher Lloyd, huh?
Yeah.
Kilowatts.
Well,
Thank you
wonderful.
very much.
Thank you. That was great. Both of you.
Thank you.
Great.